Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. This podcast is now brought to you by Fauna Marine. I was hesitant to bring on any sponsors, but since I use so many Fauna Marine products, I was really happy to have them collaborate with me. And also, I am now a certified ICP consultant, so if you send in a laboratory ICP test, you can select me as an advisor. Hey, what's up, friends? Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Reef. Today, I'm doing a little departure from the usual conversation. I decided to start doing a tank/hobbyist feature series, and I was visiting Calgary, Alberta, and I knew my friend Bertus Eksteen had an amazing system. So I went and checked it out. I got some video, and then we did this interview afterwards to lay over top of the footage. So I'll try to do these on a regular basis because I think it's kind of a cool way to get a window into someone's methods and techniques and whatnot. So Bertus has been a lover of the ocean since he was a kid. He grew up in South Africa. Now he is a physician working in Calgary, Alberta. He is obsessed with the hobby, and I think that really shows in this discussion. One thing I will say about the tank is that he had done a series of treatments sort of preemptive for acropora eating flatworms before we recorded this video. So the tank doesn't look as good as it actually should. So I hope you can imagine these corals being at full color, but I think you get a pretty good idea from the video. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Bertus Eksteen. Sweet, Bertus. Well, thanks for doing this. This will be the first of this tank feature series, so thought it'd be good to do your tank.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for chatting about the tank. So the main system is 400 gallons. The tank is 6 foot by 3 foot by 28 inches. Wanted to go for a really deep tank front to back. It just gives you better flow, better depth perception, particularly as acros start growing into big colonies. And that's going to sump below it. It's a sump mainly with bioblocks, some really old live rock. And then external to it is a small frag tank at the back, and then externally a protein skimmer and a big calcium reactor.
You started this system from dry rock because the aquascaping looks awesome.
Yeah, it grew from a previous system that I used to have. I used to have a Red Sea Reefer 525, and that had a ton of live rock in there. And it was the traditional big back wall of rock and then acros on it, and that wasn't great for flow. It wasn't great for fish.
Yeah, the old fruit stand style.
Yeah, it looked okay, but it looked a bit dated after a while. And so took out all of that live rock in two parts and rebuilt an aquascape, which is much more open, built it out of Marco rock, but moved all the live rock or big chunks of it into the sump. So, and that's how we started a transition in the Red Sea, and then we moved into the bigger tank, expanded the big Marco rock structures, so they're very much sort of like antlers, open flow, lots of place to grow, but kept all the live rock in the sump. And I think that was the secret to having a seamless transition.
Yeah, because you said you had like hardly any cycle, and you've almost probably more than doubled your water volume. So just keeping that established rock was probably key to that transition.
I mean, when we moved things over from the one tank to the other, they went to big tubs, and in the big tubs they were about there 2 weeks. When they got back in the main tank, there were some very mild dinos on the sand, about 2 weeks. And then as the corals kicked in, sucked up all the nutrients, the dinos just disappeared. And so I think, for a transition like that, having established live rock just makes it easy.
And also probably there's something to the biomass of the corals too, right? I mean, you've got there's more biology happening in a system like that. So it's not like starting a tank with a bunch of bare rock and then just putting a bunch of 1-inch frags everywhere.
Yeah, I think that would be too hard to do the small frags. I mean, some of these colonies going across were, 8 to 10 inches across. So they were already big. They probably had a big microbiome already established on it. Totally. a lot of the dry rock that we built the structures with, they were already placed within the system and had some sort of biofilm in them, so that there wasn't crazy algae growth on them. There were still a few pieces here and there, and for that, the sea urchins, they just strip it bare. So the urchins took care of the rest of it. But I think having some sort of biofilm already on it, goes a long way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and from looking from your aquascape, I'd say that's a big part of your success too, as far as like it seems like there's no dead flow areas. Like the way the rock's open is like flow kind of getting through every crevice. Like you probably noticed a big improvement in your SPS from that old sort of fruit stand style aquascape.
Well, the nice thing about the current flow, and we've got a lot of pumps on there.
Yeah. So tell me what is actually on there.
So the main system runs on a Abyss A200, and that puts a huge amount of flow through just coming from the sump. Probably more than you need, but that's okay. And then there's 2 MP60s and there's 5 MP40s. And that really creates a reef crest mode across the tank. And they're strategically placed so that some rip across the top, and there's 2 MP40s that actually blow underneath the structure to get some water flow at the base. And the one thing that's notable about this tank and the structure at present is that you'll get acros that grow up, and they form big tabling acros, they're foot across, but all the way down their stem and below onto the rock. And this is an area that's completely dark. There's no photosynthesis going on there. It keeps on crusting all the way down the rock work. And so to maintain that amount of tissue down there must be decent exchange.
I definitely think that big colonies, it's the higher parts that are in the light are still supporting those lower areas, but the flow is probably key to keeping those areas encrusting. Because I remember seeing that they kind of seem to, like, where you would think they would stop because there's almost no light, but they keep going. So
I think the difficulty of that is that requires a lot of nutrients. And whenever we've seen some recession in those areas have been when the nutrients go down. So I think you really have to feed your corals really, really well, because they probably at the limit how much extra dead space the coral carries, and that's a big nutritional need for them. So I think flow, yes, but also they're hungry at that size. They're really, really hungry.
Yeah, and you have quite a lot of fish. Not a lot of huge, I wouldn't say show size fish, but there's quite a population of tangs and the rabbit fish. And actually, I was going to ask you about the pyramid butterflies, because you don't see those super often. And I remember thinking those were really cool fish in your system. So they don't pick at anything?
They don't pick at anything. They're just great. Now, arguably, in the main 400-gallon system, there isn't a lot of LPS in there. There's an elegance and sort of a torch that grows too fast for any tank that I have, and I stick in there. And so they get chomped a bit on. That's no big deal. But there's no biting of any polyps. So you get great polyp extension, even daytime. And the pyramids, you see them a lot when you dive in Hawaii. They're about, sort of 60 feet down, and they're mostly in the water column. You never see them on the coral like the other butterflies that are always picking away. So and in the tank, they're much more interested pulling food out of the water column. They'll take pellets, they'll take frozen food. So they've been really, really good butterflies to have there. I don't know if they all behave in that way, but certainly these.
Well, and you should mention too, I mean, you have an acan in there and it's super healthy and growing well, and I would think that would be one of the first things they would snack on, and they don't seem to touch it. So the
acan is untouched and grows like crazy. It grows where no acans should grow.
High par.
It was a spare piece. Didn't have any way to put it between 2 big SPSs where there's probably about 550 par. And it's adapted, it grows like crazy, it retains its color and is unkillable. So I think every coral can adapt, and this one is indestructible.
Yeah, that's funny. So I think people are going to be wondering about nutrients and feeding. We kind of touched on that, but what is your sort of range of nitrates and phosphates, and maybe run me through your regimen of fish feeding versus coral feeding, etc.
So the tank is currently super stable. The nice thing is I got one of the Trident NPs, so you get a more dynamic day-to-day measurements. And I think every tank sort of settles on its own number. I mean, there's numbers you can chase. Mine settles with nitrates at around 15 to 16, and phosphates that run at 0.07 to 0.08. And it's remarkably stable at that. And that's without chasing it with anything. I used to have to dose some extra nitrates to keep it up, and occasionally some phosphates. But honestly, if I just feed aggressively, it sort of settles at that. And I'm happy at that level. I don't need to bring it down.
Yeah.
If I take it down from that, I actually lose a lot of coloration. I mean, the coral still looks okay, but you lose coloration.
Yeah. And you probably have some kind of canary corals you can kind of tell are starting to lighten up a little.
Go really, really light very quickly. So it runs at that sort of levels of phosphates and nitrates. Currently, the tank gets amino acids that get dosed in every day. So Julian Sprung's amino acids that gets dosed overnight, and I've always done that. The times when I haven't done it, nutrients have dropped a bit. Corals didn't look happy. I'm not entirely sure if it's the amino acids they need or if it just contributes to the overall feed.
Overall nitrates, yeah, it's possible. So it's the acro power, the two little fishes acro power.
Yep, that's the one I use.
Yeah,
and then twice a week we'll do some broadcast feeding, particularly at night, of Reefroids or Benepets, sort of alternate between the two. I like doing it at night when all the polyps are out. I think you probably get the best bet there, and then probably once a week pouring some phytoplankton.
Oh yeah, you use the live stuff, right?
Yeah, live stuff. It's, if you do it once a week, it's relatively inexpensive to get. Put some phytoplankton in, and that's about all that the corals get specifically. The big fleshy SPSs like the elegans will get target feeding with some LPS pellets. As for the fish, they generally get 2 feedings in the day. There's a earlier feeding, which is mostly oceanic coral plankton from Fauna Marin. That just the amphias and chromis just chew up, and that's really small particle size. So I suspect some of that makes its way into the coral. And then later on in the evening, that's the big feed where there's 2 blocks of big mysis, 2 blocks of small mysis, some brine shrimp, and some krill that goes in. And that seems to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, so the frozen every day. And are you doing pellets or anything else, or is it mostly the frozen?
That's mostly what we do.
Yeah.
Half put in pellets doesn't really make a difference that way. The fish is really happy with just getting the frozen stuff. And honestly, it's, if I look at how stable the macronutrients are, the phosphates and nitrates, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about lighting for a second. So it's a bunch of radions. I see there's like a row of XR15s and XR30s. These are Gen 6 Pros.
These are they're Gen 6 Pros.
Radions.
I started with for a long time I had Gen 4s, and Gen 4s were beautiful coral growers. They were great. We then moved to some were Gen 5s, and they were blue, and they just didn't have enough punch. They just didn't have enough punch for a tank that deep. And they were just too blue. And I think even if I maxed out all the channels, you really couldn't get it to, sort of 450 to 500 at the top par-wise for some of the really, really light-hungry SPS. So when we added the XR15s to give a big blanket across the tank, I just upgraded all of them to Gen 6 Pros. And the light spectrum that I run is, I guess, similar to what WWC and a lot of people do. And that is, it ramps up over an hour, and then they pretty much get blasted for 4 hours with daylight. So pretty much all the blues, all the whites full on, run the red and green at 24%. So they get a sort of cooking period. And then after that, the whites drop to about 20%, and the blues all stay and violets stay on 100%. To give about a photo period of of 12 hours.
In the back room, I saw UV. Are you running that 24/7? Is that kind of part of the system that you think is important?
I started the UV when we first moved the tank over, and there was sort of dinos for 2 weeks, thinking it might help to get those dinos out of the way. Looked under the dinos under the microscope. They were not the sort that goes in the water column, so the UV probably didn't help anything.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, added a powder blue tang, and they are really susceptible to ick. And I thought, well, okay, I'll keep it running just in case. It's a very healthy powder blue. It came out of a quarantine dealer that sold it to me.
Yeah.
So I was fairly happy it will come in clean, but I wasn't quite sure what's in the background of the tank, and I was a bit worried what would happen to it. So I just kept it running all the time, and never switched it off. And once a year, changed out the bulb, and yeah. So I don't actually know if it does anything good or bad for the tank. We've never had ick on the tang, or any of the tanks for that matter. So whether it's useful or not,
maybe helping with water clarity a little bit too, I would imagine.
It helps a little bit.
Yeah.
A tank, when you've got a tank that's deep, front to back, if your water quality isn't great, you really start to see it.
Yeah.
I run ozone on the tank as well, so there's ozone.
Okay.
And that also helps with water clarity quite a bit. So those things are easy. I don't like running carbon. There's no carbon there to clear the water. The times when I've run carbon, my ICPs were all messed up. It was really erratic.
Certain elements were just not showing up.
Yeah, it depletes things randomly. And it's very difficult when things are sort of randomly depleted to correct them. You get no pattern to it. So I'm trying to stay away from any sort of resin.
Yeah.
Any
no GFO, anything like that.
GFO, no carbon, none of those.
Yeah. Any other products you dose, like other than the Acro Power?
So yes, we dose trace. As a hangover from the old Red Sea reefer, I've always dosed the 4-part Red Sea Reef trace.
Okay.
They've been pretty good. ICPs look okay on that. The only things that go down that I have to adjust is iodine and manganese. Those are two things that Red Sea just doesn't cover that enough. But having moved over to the Tropic Marin salt, the Pro Reef salt, that actually helps a huge amount to keep iodine and manganese up. But it's still the one thing that I occasionally have to make a correction on.
Yeah, that's not too bad if it's only really those two elements that are typically low.
Yeah, I mean, when you do the more extended ICP-MS, and you look at some of the other things that are really just always come up as 0, 0, 0. I think with a reasonable water change and a good salt, most of them are actually not that bad. And elements that I thought would be an issue, like fluoride and all those things, are pretty spot on. So with a water change once a month of about 20%, it corrects that. So it's not a huge change. So I haven't really made any different changes to trace elements in that. The additional thing that's a bit quirky that is dosed extra in my system is strontium. For whatever reason, I have a big barley green slimer in the tank, and if strontium goes down, it looks really unhappy. But when it's growing fast, it sucks up strontium like you cannot believe. It will go to nothing very quickly. And so I think, especially for that specific coral, it loves decent strontium level.
You know, an interesting observation about that is I actually was helping a friend move a big green slimer out of his system just yesterday, and we had to cut a couple branches to fit it in the 5-gallon bucket because it was, a big colony, and it was so hard to cut. It was like we had to nibble it down to get it to break in the bigger branches. So maybe there's something to do with that strontium and the calcification that's happening on that species that gives it such robust, strong growth.
Yeah, there's certain elements that, certain corals preferentially like it. I think for that specific one, the barley green slimer, strontium absolutely needs it high, otherwise it's unhappy.
Yeah.
Some of the digis I have, the forest fire, if my magnesium just drops a slight bit, it looks unhappy. So there's some canaries in the tank that you can see if some of these things float below or low normal levels, they will let you know. But that's the one coral I found that strontium is just amazingly important. So that's the only quirky thing about my system.
Yeah.
The main macro elements come from calcium reactor. That does all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And that runs on also from two little fishes. They're pieces of coral that you throw into it. But I just don't think there's enough strontium in that. You get tons of alkalinity out of it.
I've heard that. Also, you're doing calc on a reverse cycle as well, if I recall.
Yeah, so ran calc at night, mostly to offset the dip that I get in my pH overnight. The calcium reactor only runs during the daytime, so that's not really a big hit, because with all the photosynthesis that go on, it really offsets the calcium reactor. But I've started putting in calc at night. It's a big system. I run about 4 liters of calc at night. And I run it on a dose, so it's not top off. It just run on a straight dose.
Okay.
And things have leveled off a bit. I mean, my pH runs at night at about 8.28, 8.3, and
really,
that's the low now. And it used to be 8.15, 8.18. So it has brought up that lower end a bit. And then daytime, it will peak at 8.45, 8.49 during the peak photosynthetic period. So you still get somewhat of a swing, but it's just not as massive as it used to be. So I do think it offsets some of that, and I think most of the CO2 in the house is when there's people here at night. So that's when the calc really does its job. Yeah,
but you have an HRV in that space too, or in your basement. So did you notice much of a difference in case anybody doesn't know, it's a heat recovery ventilator, or you have something along those lines, which is an air exchange. Did you notice much of a change in pH in the system once you added that?
Yeah, it's huge. It's massive. Because the tank is in the basement, our houses here in Calgary are really well sealed. It became too humid in the basement, so I needed to move some of the humidity out. So that was the primary driver for doing it. Just move some of the humidity. But the benefit was huge on pH, because used to struggle. The pH was probably running nighttime 7.95 or 8.0, and that's up by 0.2 by doing that. So it really has made a big difference, and allows you to get lots of air in, even when it's winter or summer when you run aircon. It really makes a big difference. So, and they're not hugely expensive.
No, they're not. I need to get one in my garage for sure. I'm definitely doing it.
And just to control humidity as well, because I mean, the big thing with big tanks, or if you have a lot of tanks, I mean, if your humidity is persistently over 50% in the house, you're probably doing some bad stuff to your house as well. So, so that's a very easy way of doing it.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, one thing we need to address is the state of the tank in these videos. So when I was over there, you had just done a series of treatments that had definitely affected the colors of the coral. So I want everybody to know that the tank is not looking its best. Some of the corals are not shining like they should, but you get the idea. But maybe just tell me about what you did and you know, why you did it. I'd say it was a little more of a preemptive thing that you did, but yeah, give me a rundown on it.
So one of the big things, you know, for anybody of aquarium is you face pests, and pests is a really big deal. So we've eradicated Aphtasia out of that system with Burgess, and there's a copperband butterfly that probably whatever pops up clears it. So we haven't seen any of that pests for a long time. And I have a quarantine system where I put all new frags and things that come in go into that. But somehow, and I look under the microscope carefully for acro-eating flatworms, for bugs, look under the microscope, make sure it's clean, and brought one frag into the main system after I thought it was clean. and then looked at it again a few weeks later, and there were clear eggs of acro eating flatworms on
Yeah,
them.
but you didn't see any acro eating flatworm. You just know that the eggs must have been there.
You know, everything where it went to in that little tank, we dipped it in KCL. There were no acro flatworms in there. We couldn't see any bite marks on any corals, but just the fact that there were eggs, whether they're viable eggs or non-viable eggs.
It's like you let the Trojan horse in, and that didn't necessarily open up yet, but you let the Trojan horse
Absolutely.
in.
And then the tank that size, I needed to be preemptive about it. It's not feasible in a tank that size to take out every coral, break down the aquascape, and dip everything. And we're sort of limited in the hobby for what we can actually pour into the tank to kill acro eating flatworms without killing everything else. So it's a real big deal. And so I found this method on First Time Reaver TV. It's a YouTube channel out of Australia. And they featured this one guy who's a reefer out in Australia, and what he does is he takes out all the water out of the tank. So he drops the water level below all the acropora, below all the corals. He makes up a KCl, so potassium chloride solution, which is, I think it's about 3.5 grams
in a liter or something like that.
In a liter, and you put it in a spray bottle. And then you just go around and you spray all of your corals, and you give them a really, really good soaking. And then once you soaked all of them, so you sort of run across them twice, that probably only means the coral's out of the water for 10 minutes, 15 minutes max. Then you just put all the water back in. So, and then you run a bubble cycle. So you blow bubbles through your power heads. It really causes the corals to produce lots of mucus, and that all sloughs off and goes down your system. And so did that 4 weeks in a row as a preemptive therapy. So
that's a lot of work, hey?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of water to move, because if you drop the water in the tank that much, you're taking out about 250 gallons.
Yeah, that's insane.
And so I had a big tub that could take 150 gallons. So I'd put that in there and put that back in. And I've got a water mixing station of 120 gallons. So it meant the tank got a water exchange of 120 gallons straight for 4 weeks every week. And that worked well. We never saw any flatworms. But I think, the downside of it is the corals are not very happy with you. And when you do water exchanges that much, you absolutely tank your nutrients. So they go very pale on you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably a part of it too, hey? Yeah.
Absolutely. And then after 2 weeks, they bounce back. But this was really great. I mean, didn't lose any corals, didn't see any dieback. And I think until we have a better solution of how to treat a big tank with acro-eating flatworms, it's a pretty easy way of just, you just run down all the water below the water level.
Yeah, or to the below the lowest acro, really.
Absolutely.
Matters.
Yeah. You can leave the fish in there.
I
did check the potassium levels in the tank before and after each treatment, because you're spraying probably about 1.5 liters of that potassium solution into the tank.
Yeah.
And it only raised the potassium by, I think, 8.
Oh, yeah, that's barely anything. Well, 3.5 grams in a system that size is not going to
it's not a lot.
much.
So, so it doesn't really mess up your potassium in any way. So I think it works well for a big tank. If it's a smaller tank, you just take out the pieces and dip them. And
it'd be a lot easier for a smaller tank, and not everybody's got the bins and totes to move that amount of water.
Yeah, it's a real pain doing it.
Yeah.
So yes, I suspect my own paranoia, not wanting to let any pests in there, but corals are happy, they're growing, and it's very interesting. 2 weeks after they got their colors back, and they're absolutely sucking up nutrients.
Yeah,
I mean, they just use so much. So obviously, photosynthesis is back on track.
Yeah, so we'll put some photos along with the video here that you send me now that the corals are back to what they should be. It's just too bad the timing wasn't better for my video visit, but what can you do, hey?
Coral pests always arrive when you have no time and don't want them. So, I think now my quarantine system is getting even more use. When I get new corals in, they all go in the quarantine system. And I don't like dipping them when they first come in, because
I agree.
They're already stressed like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You're better off just getting them in a tank, acclimatize them, just get them settled. And then it's worthwhile investing in a decent microscope. You can get a really, really good digital microscope of Amazon for not that much, and just run them under the microscope and have a really good look.
Yeah, that digital microscope, I'll put a link in the description of the episode here, but that is awesome for the price. I mean, I was blown away by the fact that that device only costs a couple $100.
It's cheap, and if you think how much you're paying for a Frag, it's as much as a decent Frag. And I think having a really good look goes a long way. Once they settle, I'll still do a potassium chloride dip on them. It's gentle. It kills most things. And quite honestly, if a Frag is really infested with a pest, I'd rather just
chuck it.
It's not worth the while. So I think having some sort of quarantine. I mean, my quarantine tank is built into an LPS system, so there's no acros that can get infected in there. And so that's a good stable system to bring them into. So it's a system that runs, it's stable, so it gives some stability what you bring them into. So I think stabilize them, get them in water quick, and then watch them. I think the watching is the key thing. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, let's ask the quick boring question here. Is just go over parameters quickly. So alkalinity range, what do you kind of shoot for?
8.2.
Okay. And calcium, any observations as well in terms of these?
No, calcium run at about 420. I don't like going any higher with the alkalinity.
I feel the same way.
That doesn't quite like it, so I'm happy if it drifts down to 7.5. I'm okay with that. Some corals just don't look happy above 8.5. I know some people will push it really high, and some salts are really high, but some corals don't really like that all that much. And I don't think higher alkalinity does that much for your pH anyway.
Or growth. I don't think it's a huge difference either.
I think there's a saturation point where if you put in any extra, it doesn't actually drive any more growth.
Yeah, for sure. So calcium, you said 420. I'm in the same range too. I don't really like it to get much higher than that. I mean, it can, but I find not so good things happen past 450.
Yeah, there's one time, long time ago, when I had a dosing issue. It went up to 480, and nothing died, but they just didn't look great. They just didn't look healthy. There wasn't great extension of polyps. So I think sort of that mid-range is okay for them.
Yeah, it's like a safe number. What about magnesium?
I run that at 1400. It's on the slightly higher end, mostly because of my Montipora, the forest fire digi. If it drops below 1400, you lose the polyp extension in it. You start losing it's bright red all the way up, and around the top you get this green and yellow tips, which are really beautiful. And you start to lose that when it drops below 1400. So you get that full spectrum out of it. It likes nutrients, it likes stable alkalinity, and it likes 1400 magnesium.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. That's another good canary coral for you, because you got the Slimer, you got the forest fire, which are pretty basic, let's say easy corals, but they obviously have a specific kind of thing that they need, which is a good indicator for you.
Yeah, they overlook corals, but if you look at the tank from a long way away, they stand out like crazy. And I think anybody that starts a tank, these are easy corals. They tell you when things are really going bad in your tank, and you can stand 10 feet away and they look spectacular. So sometimes don't overlook the cheap corals. They're great to have.
Yeah. So I guess you're not really doing anything for nutrient reduction. Hey, I mean, it sounds like the corals just absorb so much that you don't really have to add anything. So we can probably skip over that category.
The only thing I used to do a bit, and that was when it was a very young system without a lot of big corals, was those no-pox as a way of controlling nutrients. And that was right early on in the beginnings of the initial system, the Reefer 525. But I've backed off that, so they get a trickle of Nopox just as a carbon source, but not adjusted to control nutrients. I mean, I think the tank is just running on autopilot at present.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously you got a big ass skimmer in the back there. I'll show a little clip of the back room, but not too much of it.
Anybody can do that to move some of your big equipment to a small room away from your sump. It just makes maintenance so much easier. To have a big skimmer and a calcium reactor that you can actually work on, rather than trying to fiddle under the tank, is just so much nicer. And it's not insane plumbing to do it.
Yeah.
But it really, on a big tank, your maintenance becomes easier. And on a big tank, whatever is hard maintenance, you don't end up doing. So it works just easier doing that. So
you're kind of working on doing some spawning stuff. So there's a couple things, because I know I brought in those millies from Australia for you, and you've got some scolies you're trying to work on. So you're kind of researching this stuff. You're going to give it a go.
Yeah, the scolies has always been a favorite. I think big LPS that you can't frag easily is definitely one of the ways where we can go in the hobby. And if we can get some really funky colors out of them, you know, I think that would be really good. If you look at most of your master scolies, you know, master scolie is really just a combination of two of the other scolies that you get. And so if we can mix and match some of those colors, it'd be really neat.
Yeah, not to mention they're worth a few bucks.
They're worth a few bucks. And you know, and the ones I have, they have spawned once, and that was just dumb luck rather than real skill.
But I mean, then you know the cycle, though. I mean, that's a huge part of it, is knowing, you know, if they're going to stay linked up on that same cycle, then you know, you can start to, you know, plan around it, right?
Absolutely. And they spawned after having been more than a year in captivity. So these are not ones that come grab it out of the ocean. They would have made gametes and eggs in captivity. The nice thing about scolies, when they spawn, it's a really big egg sperm bundle. It's a really big bundle.
Yeah, so it's easy to pick out.
It's easy to pick at. It's easy to work at. So they did that. The big thing is to actually get them to settle and survive, and they did it at a time when I was not ready to look after baby corals. You've had a few good guests on. I think the settlement of corals like that is going to be the toughest thing. I think that's where a lot of research has to go. I think at the very least you have to have some mature tiles for them to go onto with some coral analogy. That's a must. And then a strategy around how you're going to deal with algae around it. You know, the one thing that works best is growing your own small urchins. That's usually intensive, but maybe the way that we need to go. Or you have to go down the microscope and scrape them clean every now and again, which would kill you, but is easy to do. So there has to be a bit more work done on that. Really setting up things with the apex makes it easier, because I think setting up a system where you get fluctuations on the seasonal table for your temperature is critical. And setting your daylight, moonlight cycles are also critical in this.
So this LPS system, you're doing these cycles, right? You've
absolutely
fully committed to that. And that's temperature and daylight.
Absolutely. And that's easy to do. I have to acknowledge Richard Ross. He linked me to his website for the Apex programming for that, which is not intuitive, by the way. So if you ever want to program it, find somebody who's done it before.
Copy the code.
Copy the code.
That's
the way to go. And the easiest thing to do it. So the reason why there's an LPS system separate is it's really hard running a really good SPS system and a really good LPS system. There's some overlap, and if you run a mixed tank, you can sort of get it right, but it's really difficult to do both well. And I just decided, you know what, if we're going to try and spawn the scolies, let's just move all the LPS into a dedicated system. And that's just easier to manage. And actually, all the LPS really, really look good in that.
They do.
You can just tailor to their needs so much better. So I mean, all of us start off and you run a mixed reef, and I think that's probably the hardest tank to do. So if you can at all do it run two separate things. I like both SPS, but LPS are also really beautiful.
Yeah, your polyp extension in that tank on the torches and stuff is pretty damn awesome.
It's nice to do that. And
Yeah.
so we're going to run the Scolies as a experiment, and then and I sort of said, well, you know what, if we're going to run Scolies, we might as well try and spawn some macros. And the nice millies that you got in from Australia, they're great. They're super healthy. They're different colors, and they're not. Most of the corals have been spawned in captivity have not always been great color. So, you spawn two brown millies and you get another brown millie at the end of it. I think some of the fun comes out of if you have different colors and see what comes out, and see if you get any splices or chimeras that come out of that. So they're equally running now on a light schedule and a temperature schedule that's season linked. So we'll see what happens to them. My only concern about captive corals is I think in order for them to make sperm, make eggs, they need feeding. I don't think they'll make enough eggs and sperm if they don't get fed properly. So
yeah, I would imagine also like higher protein food, because it is basically mostly protein it's generating, right? I mean, it's animal tissue, right?
Yeah. So I'm really liberal in those tanks. I mean, the Scolies get fed 3-4 times a week. They get LPS pellets, they get Benefits, they get Polyp Lab. They really get pushed quite hard. It doesn't mess up at all the nutrients in there, but they really benefit from feeding. So I do think, especially LPS, you have to push them hard with food.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, the LPS system is great. Another thing we should just say, another thing of my bad timing of my visit was that the Scolies had to be in this cage because some fish was picking at them or something, right? So the Scolies don't look as good as they should either.
Yeah, so there's a beautiful fish out there that had to find a new tank because it's a captive bred Regal Angel from Biota. When he was really small, it came in the size of a thumbnail. It was beautiful. And it got more beautiful, and then they started chopping an LPS there. So it's now in purgatory in the SPS tank, and it's fine there. So they're back to normal out of their cage. The interesting thing is, though, if you look at what happens to Scolies when they spawn, I think they put so much energy into it. They look really unhealthy for a month or so afterwards. I think that's the one thing. If we start to spawn more corals, we need to make sure that they get some downtime and fed properly, because I think the energy expenditure is massive for them to do that. So they say, any coral that does spawn the sort of month or so afterwards, they need a bit of tender loving care.
Yeah, it's like they came out of hibernation or something, or like the Bengay cardinal, the males that keep the babies in their mouth until they eject them. It's like they don't get to eat during that time, right?
But I think there's an energy expenditure. But I mean, I think it's really easy if you've got an Apex to program your equipment to do the seasonal tables, control temperature, moon cycle, day cycle. And honestly, I think for anybody who's got a stable system, to add that programming is probably a good thing for your corals to do. I mean, even if you don't intend to collect the sperm and try and do something, I think corals respond to having that sort of cyclical pattern that they go through in the year.
Yeah.
When the water gets colder, so when it goes into my winter season, the water gets a lot colder. It drops down in the LPS tank down to 22 degrees Celsius. So it drops down a lot. But it doesn't really inhibit growth that much. And if anything, the corals look happier. Their colors get more intense. It's almost like they need a downtime from crazy warm temperatures. And
it's like almost like going to the point that maybe we keep our tanks a little bit too consistent, and that we forget that, there's cloudy days and there's seasons and things change in the wild. It's not always the same, right? So
you can, the LPS, you can take them down to 22 degrees easily. That's the lowest on my cycle for that. On the SPS tank, I don't drop it lower than 24. I think that's low enough for winter for them, and then it accelerates all the way up to 28 degrees. But they look great during that downtime. It's just almost like they've got some time to catch up and preparation. get stable, and I think that sort of cyclical thing is really healthy for your tank to do that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Put in some variation, think about seasonality. Yeah, definitely things to consider. All right, cool. Well, I think we covered pretty much all the main stuff. So yeah, cool. Well, thanks for making the time, man.
That's a good chat.
Yeah. It's so you answered so many questions before I could even answer them, because you were so on the ball. So I appreciate it.
It's all good.
Yeah. Cool, man. Okay, well, have a good night, and yeah, send me some pics, and we'll put the new pics in so people know where the tank should really look like.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night. Thanks, man. Bye. Thanks for joining us today. I have to say, I don't really have any links or media to share, because Bertus is a pretty private hobbyist, and it's kind of refreshing to see. You know, some people can just enjoy the hobby to themselves, and this is a good opportunity to share his work with you guys. Just another shout out to our sponsor, Fauna Marine. Definitely check out some of their new exciting products that they brought to the market this year. If you have any suggestions for future guests, want to ask me a question, or just reach out in general, you can email me at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please go to my website at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.